LA Kings fans, sound off on the team's lineup, possible trades, and more on this Friday fan feedback edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network, also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We do have a little bit of Kings news to pass on to you, and some Kings-related news to pass on to you towards the end of the show, but this is our Friday fan feedback show, so we will get right into your emails. We'll start in the order in which they were received, and there is some editing that's been done just to make sure we get all of the emails in for this week and kind of keep things down to a certain level, if you will. We can't talk about one email for 15 minutes, so to speak. So with that in mind, we will begin with Keith, and he is in parts unknown. My guess is that Keith may be emailed, and he didn't give his location, so I said he's in parts unknown, and he's decided to stick with it. So it is mysterious. But anyway, Keith from Parts Unknown is checking in. He says, my big point of contention with the LA Kings is that each year it seems to be a retooling of the roster rather than building a nucleus to let the team develop chemistry over a few years. As for the PL Dubois trade, I do believe the Kings were wise to make a trade with Winnipeg. However, I wish they would have traded for Mark Scheifele instead. Sure, hindsight's 2020, but I've always been a fan of Scheifele and thought that he'd be a perfect 1-2 punch at center behind Andrei Kopitar, a duo built much in the way of Kopitar and Jeff Carter. Like Carter, Scheifele is a right-shot centerman, so that would have provided some nice balance in the top six. Had they acquired him and not BLD, I would have put Fiala on the left wing on the second line. And now on the subject of Arthur Kaliyev, he says he's a phenomenal scorer. He has a shot that most people can only dream of. That said, he's also got a big frame that most people can only dream of, and he neglects to use it. Going back to his draft year, I remember analysts suggesting he was a mid-first round pick. Some even said that he could go in the top 10. I never thought that. When he fell into the second round, I thought that was more indicative of his draft grade and was actually in favor of LA drafting him at that point because, if nothing else, he could be a trade chip later on. One of the biggest gripes I have about his game in juniors was that he never seemed interested in doing anything other than shooting the puck. He wouldn't body guys out on the boards, take a hit to slow down a play, give a hit to neutralize the opposition. He always just seemed to float around and wait for his shot. To his credit, when he came to LA, he seems like the development coaching staff did find a way to bring more out of his game in the NHL. In order to get time on the power play, you have to do things throughout the game other than just shooting. While I think this line of thinking is behind the times, it's still the way things are done. Kaliyev is a one-trick pony, and unless he finds other things to add to his bag of tricks, he's not going to be given a chance to contribute as only he can. A kid line, maybe a third line of Turcotte, Byfield, and Kaliyev could be fun, but he's going to have to earn it. And again, that was from Keith in Parts Unknown. Kaliyev was certainly an exceptional scorer in junior, which I assume is what you were referring to. He certainly hasn't proven to be an exceptional scorer at the NHL level, but you can understand why people were enamored with what he did at the junior level. He had 51 and 44 goals, 102 and 98 points in his last two seasons, and those numbers do get your attention. But as you mentioned, there is, in fact, more to playing hockey than just shooting puck and putting the puck in the net, although certainly that's an important part of the game. That's certainly why they keep score. But clearly that is why Arthur Kaliyev hasn't gotten as much playing time or hasn't gotten the shot that a lot of people, the chance, I should say, that a lot of fans would like to have seen him get. I will say, I think Kaliyev clearly he's got that above average shot. We know that. But he's not very good at creating his own shot. He needs other players to set him up. I've said I'd love to see the Kings give it one more shot. He's only 23 years old. And yes, while maybe he does have a kind of specific skill set, and yes, he has to do other things as well as, just not shooting, but maybe pairing him, as you said, up with Quentin Byfield on the second line. I actually would like to see that. And look, Quentin can create his own shot. We've seen him take the puck end to end and get the puck on net and score. So he has that ability. I think a player like Quentin Byfield could be the best thing for Arthur Kaliev. And I would tell Q, look, if this is going to happen, you need to look for Arthur Kaliev. You need to set him up. I want you to set him up for 5 good shots a game, something like that. And certainly if it's not there, you don't force it, but have that in his consciousness. Anyway, that's my thoughts on it. You say Arthur Kaliev's not a second line winger. Well, we're probably going to be playing Warren Fogle as a second line winger, and he's not a second line winger. So we know what Warren Fogle is, though. He's a third line winger. He's proven that over many seasons. For Arthur Kaliev, it's still not completely in the books as far as what he is, what he can be. Like I said, 23 years old. I'd like to see them give him one more shot and see what he could do. And then if he can't do it, then we've given it every honest effort we could to try and see if Arthur Kaliev could make it or not. As for trading for Mark Scheifele over Pierre-Luc Dubois, sure. But look, Scheifele is 31 now. Pierre-Luc Dubois is now 26. The Kings were not only looking for a player who could help them in the now, but down the road as well. This was obviously the contract they signed Pierre-Luc Dubois to. That was a long-term investment. They were looking at him and Byfield being the 1-2 punch at center for many, many years to come after Anze Kopitar had hung it up. Obviously, that didn't work out, but that's what they were thinking, and that's why they didn't trade for a guy like Mark Scheifele. Scheifele would have probably been a better immediate kind of a fix as a second-line center. But you also have to remember the year that the Kings traded for Pierre-Luc Dubois, Mark Scheifele was coming off a 42-goal season. So it wasn't like the Jets were looking to trade him. It was going to take more than Velarde and Iafallo and Kupari and a pick to get Mark Scheifele, most likely. So I don't know that trade was even possible at the time. But Mark Scheifele is a proven NHL player. And I can understand wanting to get him over Pierre-Luc Dubois, but that, again, because of his age and because the Jets, I'm sure, weren't looking to trade him, that wasn't going to be a possibility, I don't think. Our next email comes from John in Valencia, and he says, I definitely agree with your Mount Rushmore decision on Gretzky. Although the best player on the planet, his best years were with Edmonton. I also most definitely agree with Dion over Luke. I get quite frustrated with fans who have no clue who Marcel Dion is and never got a chance to watch him play. I fortunately had the pleasure to watch him play. The man was incredible. The biggest thing about his era was that the Kings were absolutely horrible in those years. He carried the team for years until he finally got Dave Taylor and Charlie Simmer to form the Triple Crown line. He and Guy Lafleur were the two best players in hockey and always battled for the scoring lead. I love the Kopitar, Doughty, and Quick picks and your players, but I can honestly say they could not carry a team the way Dion was forced to. My top 10 for the Kings Mount Rushmore: Dion, Kopitar, Doughty, Quick, Robitaille, Blake, Taylor, Vachon, Brown, and Simmer. I'm still not feeling good about the season. I think we have created too many question marks that will create a lot of pressure on our young players. If this season ends up like I think, what will be the plan to change it? New GM would be a given. Will Luke stay? How do you improve the team with the salary cap nightmare we have? Who would take on Doughty's or Edmondson's salary? At least we lose Gavrikov almost $6 million. Phil needs to run his hockey team, talking about Philip Anschutz, a little like his railroad, and needs a salary cap specialist like the Rams have. Fiala must play like an $8 million player. I'm planning to attend the rookie face-off. Looking forward to meeting you there. And again, that was from John in Valencia. First off, John, Mount Rushmore, that's only 4. You gave us a top 10 list, and I have no trouble with your top 10 list. But who's your 4? I assume it was the first 4 that you named. I don't know that for a fact, but yeah, Mount Rushmore, it's the 4 presidents' faces on that mountain in South Dakota. So your first 4 was Dion, Kopitar, Doughty, and Quick. I'm guessing that's your Mount Rushmore. I appreciate the thoughts on Marcel Dion. I've said I did not see him play. I would have loved to have seen him play, but I can only go by what I've heard, what I've read, and the stats. And clearly he's an all-time great, and he was in my Mount Rushmore. My feelings on this season, I'm definitely curious to see how the season goes. I would not say, though, that I'm very optimistic, not trying to be negative, but I think the Kings are a bubble team. Yeah, they could make the playoffs again, and making the playoffs 4 straight years is pretty significant accomplishment, especially for the Kings franchise. But I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't make the playoffs. We'll see. Like I said, I am very curious to see how it goes. But you are correct in asking what's next if they don't make the playoffs and what changes are going to be made. Certainly, Rob Blake won't be brought back. You bring in the new GM, and he wants to put his stamp on this franchise. What that means for the roster, what that means for the coaching staff, who knows? So, yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting season, and definitely looking forward to possibly meeting up with you at the rookie face-off in El Segundo at the Toyota Sports Performance Center when that comes up in September. Up next, we have a Patrik Laine update. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, no matter how the last event went, anytime you take the field, you've got a shot at greatness. Give your team the best shot at winning by recruiting more MVPs with Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. Indeed partners with you on every step of the hiring process. Find great talent through Indeed's time-saving tools like Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. With Instant Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of qualified candidates with resumes on Indeed that match your job description, and you can invite them to apply right away. Plus, you only pay for quality applications that meet your must-have requirements. So start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/locked-on. Offer valid for a limited time. Go to Indeed.com/locked-on to claim your $75 credit for a limited time. Indeed.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, our next email comes from Mike in Long Beach, and he said, did you see Patrik Laine got traded? Yes, I did. Obviously not to the Kings. Obviously not. He goes to the Montreal Canadiens and a second-round pick for defenseman Jordan Harris. I know you said you didn't want the Kings to sign Laine or trade for Laine, but that's a steal to me. Does what Montreal got in return change your mind at all? Thanks to the show. And that was Mike in Long Beach. If you missed it, yes, we had talked about Patrik Laine being traded, demanding a trade out of Columbus, and there were reports, rumors that the Kings could possibly be a destination for Patrik Laine. I had said no thanks. But as far as the deal itself, when I first heard it, I thought it was Patrik Laine for Jordan Harris and a second-round pick. I was wrong. When I double-checked it, he's Mike in Long Beach is right. It was Laine and a second-round pick going to Montreal in exchange for basically a third pairing defenseman. And on the surface, you're like, what? That's amazing. Why would they do that? Well, the reason why the Blue Jackets included that second round pick is because they did not want to retain any of Laine's salary. And that was the price to pay for not doing that. The Canadiens took on the entire contract, which is $8.7 million per year. And I was wrong. I thought he had 1 year left on his contract. He actually has 2 years left on his contract. So look, the Kings, again, is that on at face value a great deal for Montreal? Yeah, I think it is. But Montreal's in a different situation than the Kings. Montreal is desperate to be relevant again, to come close to being a playoff team again. They haven't been for quite some time. They can afford to take a chance more on a player like Patrik Laine if they had the cap space, obviously, to do it. So not the same situation. The Kings would have had to have gotten a couple of players off their roster to be able to include a Patrik Laine. And I've said Laine again, he's a bit of a reclamation project. He hasn't stayed healthy for the last 4 seasons. He is coming off a stint in the NHL assistance program, which, again, I'm not trying to make light of mental health or any substance issues. And I'm not saying that should be necessarily like held against him. Maybe he came through the program. He's been released to play. So he's free to resume his career. But again, I think you have to take that into consideration. People do relapse. People do have continuing issues that they have to fight through. And he's got the injury issues. And he makes $8.75 million a year. Now, when he's healthy and when he's right, he is a very good goal scorer, and he could really help out your power play. And the Kings need a top 6 forward like him. But again, coming off the Pierre-Luc Dubois situation, You want to roll the dice on another guy who could be another kind of player like that for 2 years at $8.75 million. I again, that's a great deal for Montreal. The Kings are in a different situation than the Canadiens. Good for them. Maybe it works out. Maybe it doesn't. But for the LA Kings, that deal did not change my mind. As good as it was for Montreal, I still would not have made that deal for the LA Kings. Jim in Lakewood checking in. He sent me a link to a story about former Kings goalie Cam Talbot. And he commented that he had no idea that Cam Talbot was playing on his 7th team in 8 seasons. And yes, I clicked on the link. I checked out the article, and yeah, Cam Talbot is on his 7th team in 8 seasons. He was with the Oilers. He got traded to the late in the season to the Flyers. The next season, he ended up going to the Flames. Next year, he goes to Minnesota for 2 years. And now he's had a 1-year stint at Ottawa, a 1-year stint in LA, and now he's in Detroit. So we don't normally think about that kind of thing when it comes to athletes. We tend to only focus on the amount of money they make, the fact that they're catered to in a lot of ways. Being a professional athlete is obviously a very exclusive club, and a lot of us would love to be able to do something like that, or at some point in our career, maybe dream about doing something like that. But there is a human element as well. And Cam Talbot has, I believe, twin girls, and I think they're under 10. So you're talking about, I would assume that they're moving with him. You're talking about 7 different schools in 8 years. It takes a toll on your family, and that's got to be very difficult. Now hopefully the trade-off is that he's making enough money that they're going to be set up for life, and he can pay for their college and their weddings and give them a comfortable life. And I certainly can understand that. But I'll be honest with you, I didn't know. I knew he had been pretty well traveled of late, but 7 teams in 8 seasons is pretty surprising. And I think the Kings would have loved to have had Cam Talbot back for another year, but because of the PLD trade, and they had to take on Darcy Kemper, maybe they could have decided to keep Talbot and not David Riddick, but who knows? But that's again, I thought that was a interesting article, and yeah, there is another side of things when it comes to players and being traded and what their lives are like. It's great, but there are some downsides to it too when it comes to stuff like that. Ed in Brea, formerly Edwin in Brea, apparently he's now Ed in Brea. Also known as the non-dancing Edwin and the enemy of fun. He says, I watched the Dieter Rule interview, and he's a very nice man. I've met him a few times. He says, I watched the Miracle on Manchester replay, and when Darrell Evans scored the overtime game winner, there was no goal horn. He said, just the organ music playing. Did you know, Edwin is going to give us some history here. Did you know the St. Louis Blues were the first team ever to have a goal song when they debuted it along with the Kings in 1967? They played The Saints Go Marching In, but they called it The Blues Go Marching In. I think they still play that. Maybe not when they score. At some point after they score a goal, I'm almost positive they still play that. Anyway, Edwin continues, how far sports events have come from then to now, for sure. He says, since the 90s, fans wear team jerseys to games. Before then, though, not much. During the original 6 and the modern expansion era, when the Kings debuted, hockey fans dressed up to go to games. Women wore dresses, men wore suits, fedoras, hats, etc. Going to a sporting event in that era was like going to a formal event. The only people now that I see wearing suits at games are the broadcasters like Nick Nixon, Darrell Evans, and Jim Fox, and maybe the team staff, the ticket representatives. I would not mind wearing a nice suit to indoor events like a hockey game. Outdoor events like baseball, not so much. Anyway, just wanted to get your opinion on this matter. And as always, go Kings go. And that was formerly Edwin in Brea, now Ed in Brea, as my dog is barking in the background for some reason. This is interesting that you bring this up, Ed, because I was talking about this recently. My wife, as I mentioned a lot of times, is a longtime hardcore San Diego / LA Chargers fan. And we were looking for something to watch, and I went on YouTube and I found an old Chargers Bengals Monday Night Football game from 1982, and we watched it, and it was a really entertaining game, by the way. It wasn't like, the Chargers and the Bengals back in that time, they were throwing the ball all over the field. It looked like a modern game. because back in the 70s and 80s and before that, obviously in football they run the ball a lot. It's not like they now where they throw it all over the field. Anyway, it was a really fun game. The guy who uploaded it left all the commercials in, so it was very nostalgic and funny to see all these old commercials, see these new cars, which of course now are very old cars. But anyway, one thing we noticed watching that game, nobody was wearing a jersey, and very few people were wearing even t-shirts and hats. That it was in San Diego that had Chargers on it. So yeah, certainly no suits were being worn. It was people in shorts and shirts and stuff like that. But it has really changed. And I think you're right. I think when I started to become a Kings fan, I remember the games I went to, I usually would buy a jersey and wear a jersey. But maybe sometime in the 90s, it changed where, you go to a sporting event now, it's unusual to see someone not wearing a hat or a t-shirt or a jersey or a jacket representing the team. So that's certainly something that has changed over the years for sure. We've got some news on a former Kings Stanley Cup winner and also some news on how you'll be watching the LA Kings next season. That's next year on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Those of us that live in the LA area, we are so lucky that we have so many opportunities to see live events. Sports for sure. I'll be at every Chargers home game this NFL season after I'm married into Chargers season tickets. We go every year. I'm also going to be headed to Pittsburgh in a few weeks to see my Steelers take on my wife's Chargers. But it's not always just about sports. There are theater events, obviously, here in the LA area, concerts, music. We just got invited to go to the Hollywood Bowl at the end of the month to see a live performance of all the music from the Marvel movies. Yes, I am that kind of nerd. But no matter what you enjoy, whether it's concerts, sports, comedy events, theater, you need to do what I do. You need to use Gametime for all your ticket needs. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Are you a Dodgers fan? Gametime has a 50% off Labor Day offer that you need to check out. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL, LOCKEDONNHL, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. I did want to say to Scott in Simi Valley, who sent me an email, he said it was not to read on the air, so I did not. But I will try and check out some clips of that Flyers Kings brawl that you had talked about. And I did go and look on YouTube, and I'm almost positive, if we have her on again, I'll have to ask her about it. But I believe Carl and Baith's dad, Frank Baith, was in that huge Flyers Kings brawl playing for the Flyers back in the 70s. So obviously that was before she was born, I would think, or around the time she was born. So probably before she was born. And so I don't know, she doesn't have any recollection of it personally, but seeing it live, certainly. But I wonder if she's been told about it, if she knows about it, if we can get her back on. Of course, Carlin Bay, the part of the Bally Sports LA Kings TV broadcast, and we have news on that coming up in just a second. But I did want to mention former LA Kings Stanley Cup winner forward Tanner Pearson was signed to a player tryout by the Vegas Golden Knights. You may remember he was drafted in the first round, 30th overall by the Kings back in 2012. I was actually at that draft. Pearson played his first 6 years of his NHL career in LA, 325 games with the Kings. He had 69 goals and 75 assists for 144 points. Won a Stanley Cup with the LA Kings back in 2014, of course, as part of that 70s line with Jeff Carter and Tyler Toffoli. All their jersey numbers were in the 70s. I'm sure you remember that. Pearson wore number 70. Last year, Tanner played 54 games for the Canadiens. He had 5 goals and 13 points. He's a veteran of 11 NHL seasons with the Kings, Penguins, Canucks, and Canadiens. And while I wish Tanner Pearson all the luck in the world, not fun to see him go to that team with the Vegas Golden Knights. I'm not saying I don't want him to make the roster, but hard to root for any former King when they go to that team. And that included Jonathan Quick when he went there. I just could not root for him. So I mentioned Carl and Baith. I mentioned Bally Sports. Did want to pass on this bit of news. The Diamond Sports Group went, they're the bankrupt operator of the Bally's sports channels. Well, they reached a new deal with the NHL that has ensured that they will broadcast games 4 teams for at least through the upcoming season. Now, Bally Sports will broadcast games for 9 NHL teams, the Ducks, the Kings, as well as the Hurricanes, Blue Jackets, Red Wings, Wild, Predators, Blues, and Lightning. So as far as we know at this point, however you watched Kings games on TV last season is how you will watch them this season. For me, it was on DirecTV on Bally Sports West. So again, at least for one season, you'll be watching Kings games exactly the way you watched them this past season. So nothing changing as far as we know, as far as it looks for this upcoming season. But again, this is a company that's in bankruptcy. They claim they've struck a deal that they will finish out this season, and then after that, we'll see. They're hoping that they can get purchased by another group that will continue to broadcast the games. But again, it's very much up in the air. So again, just wanted to pass that along. If you were curious, maybe you didn't even think about it, but again, the way you watched the Kings games last season is the way you should be able to watch Kings games this coming season. After this season, who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Obviously, the landscape of how sports are being broadcast is changing year to year. More and more sports and leagues are going to streaming. There are NHL teams that are now doing just over-the-air broadcasting, not doing any kind of cable. So again, it's evolving, it's changing. But for this coming season, if you're a Kings fan or if you're a Ducks fan, looks like it's going to be the exact same way you watched games this past season. All right. Thanks to everyone who took the time to email. Really appreciate it. This show's not possible without your participation. Hopefully we'll continue to do it during the off season because we have these shows every Friday. You want to send an email, it is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. For you everydayers, or right now every other dayers, we will talk to you next Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but we'd like you to stay interactive with the show by following us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday. And as always, go Kings, go.